Masterclass with Lee Rayner and Greg Vinal. Lee, welcome back, mate. It's been a little while since we had a chat. How are you going down there in Melbourne?
Oh, going pretty good, Greg. Going as well as can be expected.
You're
However,
still smiling. That's good to see.
yeah, still, well, you know what? I just work on the theory, I suppose, that people have always got it worse. So, I can sit here and say I haven't been able to go fishing or I haven't been able to do this or that, but, there's people that have really had it and got it a lot worse. And there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I suppose that's what we're all striving for with this COVID.
Yep. No, definitely good to keep it in perspective. But yeah, I'm sure you're itching to get out for a fish. You're getting out at all, mate? Is it close enough? Are you close enough to the bay that you can get out and wet a line from time to time?
Yeah, a bit, mate. I'm pretty lucky that I'm only a 3-minute drive from Patterson River, and there's bream and perch and mulloway and stuff in there. And I've actually been fly fishing for the bream a fair bit the last few weeks, and that's been heaps of fun. And yes, we can go 15 kilometres, so that gets you out in the bay and stuff like that. But unfortunately, this time of year, the really good fishing for whiting and big squid and all that's on the other side of the bay, and that's about 25 to 30. And I don't need to risk it and get a $5,000 fine. So,
it's an expensive fishing trip if that happens.
Yeah, exactly. The upside is, mate, we are into spring all over the country, and spring, I suppose, is in many cases the start of fishing season. And for here, there's just on everyone's lips is snapper season. So it's a pretty exciting time of year.
Yeah, we've got a few people jumping on board there and saying hello. So thanks, guys, for letting us know that you can hear us okay. That's great to know. Yep. So, Lee, you were saying we had a bit of a chat just before we hit the go live button. And you were saying that this is the time of year when the snappers start to come in, and you can actually do pretty well for fishing for them off the shore. So if you don't have a boat or you can't get your boat to the water, you can still have a fish off the shore.
You can, mate. And in many cases, Greg, the land-based guys catch them better than the boat fishing guys. It's just the fish come into the shallows when it's rough, and I'm talking 2, 3, 4 meters of water, because there's in many cases you've got a lot of yabby beds and it's crab, like sand crabs and all that sort of stuff. And the water's often warmer in there. Just like on a barra impoundment, you fish where that wind blows into a point or a bay, and that's where that warmer water will be. And Jace Wilhelm taught me that years and years ago at a Wonga. So it's the same sort of scenario here. And when those fish are in the shallows, Greg, they're only there to do one thing, and that's feed. They're not there just to hang out. So the land-based boys often do very, very well. And it's a funny thing that we get in our boats, and the first thing we do is jump out into 15, 16, 20 metres of water, and the guys are fishing off the piers in 4 metres and 3 metres, and they're catching them and we're missing them. So a good tip straight off the bat is, if you want to catch a snapper, maybe fish when it's rougher, early season. And fish shallow. Like, it's never too shallow for a snapper.
That's right. We often think of them as being a deeper water fish, but they're really not, are they?
No, well, mate, if I'd been hanging out in Bass Strait or Port Phillip Bay and it's 10 degrees through winter, I'd be trying to find my warmest little patch of water that I could, just to try and thaw out a little bit. So it makes sense that they push into these sort of shallow areas.
Yeah. Now, Lee, we've got a fair few people coming on board now, and a lot of comments there in the chat box. So thank you, everybody, once again, for letting us know that you can hear us. That's great. Andrew's asking where the squid are, mate. Just sit tight. We're going to be telling you where the squid are in no time at all. We've got a bunch of screenshots from your Sonar, Lee, that we're going to run through in random order. Now, folks, the idea of these sessions, of course, is for you to interact with us. So the more questions you ask, the longer Lee's going to stick around and answer questions, the more fun we're going to have, the more information is going to be shared. We're going to duck over and just have a look at some screenshots from time to time, and they're going to be kind of random. So we'll see what pops up, and then Lee can tell us about what we're actually looking at. But feel free to fire questions at us, whether they're questions about how to use your Simrad, whether they're questions about how to use Sonar more generally, or whether they're just questions about snapper or squid fishing over the next couple of months. We're happy to talk to you. So, Lee, what about we just head straight into those screenshots, mate, see what you've got for us?
Let's go for it.
All right, let's do it. Now, I might mention also, folks, that Lee has actually gone as far as thawing out bait. You can see sitting there in his lounge room. He's got all his gear in front of him. He's all set. If anyone's got any questions, wants to know how to rig a bait, wants to know how to rig a lure, anything like that, Lee's all set. So feel free to fire questions through. In fact, we've got one from Dean already. He's asking about Lumo Rigs, mate. Tell us about Lumo Rigs. Do they help?
Yeah, look, it's a funny thing. Snapper I believe they're a predatory species, and I think people need to get it through their head, Greg, that, here we fish a dead pilchard on the bottom or a dead whiting or whatever. Snapper don't swim around the ocean eating dead stuff off the bottom. They swim around eating live stuff, and off lakes entrance and places like that, and up the New South Wales coast, they love a big live slimy or a live squid and stuff like that. So they're very attracted to A, live things, and B, they seem to be a species that are attracted to a bit of flash or something a little bit funky. And a perfect example of that is, it's a bit left field. When I'm trolling for snapper, I usually troll 2 rods.
Yep.
One lure is always something ridiculous like that. That's an X-Rap 10 Rapala, and it's GFR. It's bright orange and yellow and gold, and that often outfishes your more traditional sort of, bait fishing patterns. But I always tend to run 2, and I'll run a real natural bait fish, and I'll run a bright one. But more often than not, Greg, the bright colour gets them. And when it comes to beads and things like that, if I go with something like this is the Black Magic Snapper Snack. It's different to the Snapper Snatcher. So the Snapper Snatcher's got that sort of stiff, bristly Flashaboo material. The Snapper Snack has the skirt on it that basically is, people would probably know the Lucanus jigs from, that Shimano brought out years and years ago, with those rubber style jigs that have got that lead head. And that's what this has got here. It's got that rubbery skirt, but it's also got a bit of Lumo tube on it, and it's all these factors that make it work. And it's quite amazing that in low light, you chuck something out and you can't see your bait, but you only need to see this tiny little bit of glow, whether it's orange or green or whatever. And I think it just potentially gives the fish that focus point. They just go, "Ooh, what's that?" And they'll swim over and see what it is. And then when you combine it with one of those skirts and a little bit of bait, it can be absolutely deadly. And I always fish, especially in more of a current situation. In Western Port, I like to fish them on a long leader, and they just, on the head of your bait, they've given it that bit of, I suppose, extra spice. In Port Phillip and even in Western Port or offshore, that paternoster style rig bouncing up and down, got a bit of glow, a bit of skirt, and it really, really does work.
Does the job. We've got now I've got a bit of echo feedback coming through there, mate. I'm not sure if your volume might be up a bit, but we've got a ton of questions coming through, guys. We're going to get through everybody's questions, but they do kind of scroll through faster than we can keep up with them. So if we don't ask your question straight away, please rest assured that we will go back through the questions from time to time, and if you can always put them up again. Don't feel shy about asking a question twice if we don't get to you. So let's work through a couple of these questions, mate, because they're coming thick and fast.
Sure.
We'll try and get on top of them. So best baits early in the season, pillies in Port Phillip Bay, correct or not correct?
I think you'd be mad not to put a pilchard out. And I think you'd be mad not to take a pilchard pretty well anywhere you go in the country, because they are probably one of the main food sources for so many species, because they're such a prevalent species. Pillies are so good, and squid. I find it so hard to go past a bit of squid, a bit of fresh squid, but even frozen squid's good, Greg. I don't have any problem at all with calamari that I've caught, packed, frozen. The number one key I would say to anybody, never, ever, ever, ever let your bait touch fresh water. That's the number one key. It has to be just pulled out of salt water, wrapped up, packed nice and tight, no air, and it's good. But pillies are great. Silver whiting, you call them school whiting up there in Queensland. Anything like that's good. Snapper, a bit of an opportunistic feeder too, I think. So, I don't ever go out just with pilchards or just squid. It's good to have that bit of a mix.
Yeah. And another good tip, of course, if you're using squid, don't use the supermarket stuff. Make sure it's Australian squid that you're using. We don't need to bring imported diseases into our squid population. So that goes for pilchards, it goes for prawns, it goes for just about any bait you want to use.
And the bonus is too, Greg, that in these southern states and even up in New South Wales and Queensland, there's a lot of squid around. So to grab the kids, go out, get a couple of squid jigs and catch a couple of squid, whether you use them fresh or take them home and freeze them for bait or eat most of them and then whatever's left they're such a good versatile bait for so many species. So it's worth having. The other one that's an interesting bait down here, Greg, and I've done really well on them early season, is sauries. They're a super oily ocean garfish, and half a saury is a really, really good bait. And I think they're very shiny, they're very, very oily, and the fish just find them and they eat them.
Yeah, cool. Hey, let's get on to our Sonar question. Hey, that's partly why we're here. So Luke has a Simrad Evo 12,
Evo 12, Evo 2 12 inch.
Let me get it straight. Evo 2 12 inch with a 1 kilowatt transducer. Best settings for snapper and swords. Snapper in 40 minutes and swords off lakes. Two very different scenarios there.
For your, I suppose let's talk snapper soon first. Just like anything, I think it really pays to sort of, you've got to play around with them. And the great thing is that you can't wreck them. People need to know that. You can't wreck them. If you make a mistake, you can go back. First of all, I run my colour sort of between that 75 and 82 to 85 sort of area. If you're looking for weed and stuff on the bottom, I'll generally pull the colour back a bit so I can see more definition of weed and stuff on the bottom. If you're getting a bit of interference or whatever, just keep adjusting it. You want the detail. You don't just want it to be a solid red, because the other key factor I find is, and I'm sure a lot of people will back me on this, yes, you'll catch snapper on the hard reef, but it's a matter of finding that rubble on the edge of the reef. Where the reef meets, before the reef comes off, you get rubble and then you'll get sand. The reds and a lot of the predators like to hang on that. So if you run your colour at the right sort of setting, you'll be able to pick up that differentiation. Your gain, it's going to matter on the day. It really is. Like what I might fish in 30 metres and have the gain on in October off Lake's entrance could be completely different to what it is in November, because you're talking different water temperature, all that sort of stuff. So TVG sort of up, 2 or 3. And I just like, I don't know about you, Greg, but I like a normal scroll speed. Some people have a really fast scroll speed, but I like just normal. What about you?
No, normal scroll. Yeah, I don't play around much with scroll speed, I have to admit.
No.
Unless I'm, wanting to try and pick things up while I'm scooting along fast, but generally I'm not going to play around with it. Auto works pretty well.
When you run that normal scroll speed, you get that beautiful big, that proper arch.
Yeah, you get a nice arch. Yeah, it's easy to pick. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned weed, and Williams asked a question about what weed looks like on your sounder when you're squid fishing. Have we got a screenshot that's going to come up at some stage?
There probably will be in there, Greg, if you've got one there where there's a bit of reef and stuff like that.
Let's maybe, William, we're going to park your question for the moment, so stick around, because when we go through some of those screenshots, sooner or later there's going to be one there with some weed on it, and Lee will point that out for you. So what else have we got here? Simon Webster. What's Simon saying? Lee, when you arrive at your chosen location, are you running twin screens? Depth under 30 metres, what screens do you use?
To best utilise the
two displays.
So, look, I tend to run, if I said I was running 2 screens, and if I'm talking right, what I'll run in many cases, if I've got, say, Western Port, we've got a lot of tide, I'll often run high frequency in 200 kilohertz. Okay, and it's amazing how sometimes the 200 will pick up the fish and the high is just getting lots of clutter because it's just picking up every bit of detail. The other one I really like to do is go to bottom line. So then I'll have half the screen that's showing the bottom going up and down, and the other half of the screen is just straight, flat, and you can pick up that. And then I'll zoom that in, maybe ×2, ×4, and then you'll pick up that really super fine detail. See, out here in Port Phillip Bay, you get a lot of blue mussels and stuff like that, scallop beds, and you can't actually see them, but you'll just see there's little sort of bumpy sort of bottom. Same in Western Port, you get cungy and stuff, and you'll pick up on that, and that's where those fish will hang.
You can see the texture on the bottom.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Question from Andrew about down rigging and trolling around burley trails.
Yeah.
I think it's something we might have mentioned once before in a podcast.
Look, there's a lot of advantages to down rigging. It's one of my favourite ways to fish for snapper. It's easy, it's clean, it's like plastics fishing. It's, 1 or 2 rods, it's easy. You're covering water, and I believe that's a huge part of catching fish. You're covering water. So when I'm trolling with down riggers, the bonus is that if there's a whole group of boats in the area, don't go cutting across the back of them, but you can comfortably troll down the sides of boats and around the edges without getting in the way, versus if you tried to anchor up near a guy, it's going to cause dramas. And certainly if you're going to troll, it's a great way to just find fish. But the good thing about trolling is if there's a whole bunch of boats in an area, I'll definitely work that down tide side of where all the burley's carrying. And it's amazing, Greg, how often you'll have, say, 20 boats sitting close together, and unless you've seen Port Phillip Bay when it's busy, like I have mates come down from Sydney and they just like, what is going on here? There's just that many boats jammed into an area where the fish are feeding. But you'll often find there's a cluster of boats, and yes, they're catching fish, but then you get like 200, 300, 400 meters off that back end of the boats where the tide is, and there'll be another big cluster of fish sitting down there, you know, away from the boats, but also probably where that burley and stuff could be carrying.
Yeah. And that would never happen in Queensland, you know, with regards mackerel or snapper either up here. It's I can't think of anywhere on the Gold Coast where that might happen. So, Lee, Steve's asking us for a bit more information about trolling for snapper using hard bodies, preferably without a downrigger. So he'd like to try swim and glide baiting this season, with snapper being the target. What advice have you got, mate?
100%. Probably no better place to be looking than Ricketts Point down to Black Rock along the edge of the marine park, the green sticks, sit on the outside edge. The bonus is the snapper. Like, Greg, these snapper get up into a metre of water there. It's crazy, and in big numbers and big fish, okay? And you can fish down the edge of that, casting plastics, doing whatever, but I am also very keen this season to get out with some glide baits and stuff like that, because I believe slow rolling a glide bait doesn't necessarily have to be a big one over these areas that are 2 to 4 meters deep, in the evenings and early mornings, and that you will catch some very, very big snapper doing that. So I would certainly be looking Ricketts Point to Black Rock, and even up the top end of the bay, up around the city, the snapper get right up in the shallows there off St Kilda, which even people in Queensland have heard of places like St Kilda. So some big snapper in those parts of the world.
Yeah. So you don't need to go in. You can fish with a shallow swimming hard body or a deep diver that's going to bump along the bottom, and the bib's going to keep the hooks up. So
100%. Something like that's probably one of my favourites, the F-Trap 10 Magnum. It dives 10 foot. So at least I know if I'm trolling around, and that's what I do tend to do when I'm trolling. I'll split the depth over to feet rather than meters. Piff a couple of these out the back, and if I'm in 15 and 20 foot of water, I just know that that's running 5 to 10 foot off the bottom. And those snapper you're marking more mid-water and up off the bottom a bit, they're the ones that do tend to love to eat this sort of stuff. So, but they'll eat a bigger one too. I've got mates in South Australia that troll X-Trap 30s. So,
they're not shy. They're a lot more aggressive, and they're a lot more pelagic than most people realise, the old snapper.
100%. I think if you put in perspective, an X-Trap 30, it's just like a big pilchard.
Yeah.
So it's not an overly big. It looks big to us, but in perspective, it's not an overly big.
No, in terms of what they'd normally eat, it's probably in the ballpark. So,
exactly.
Now Lee's asked a question about whether you use Lumo torch as well. I think that's in regards to the Lumo beads.
Yep.
Yes.
100%. It just makes it nice and fast. Just same thing, squid jigs, whatever. You just hit them with a UV torch, a couple of seconds, and they're charged up, rather than having to try and hold them up under lights and things like that. And it does make them glow brighter, that's for sure.
Yep. Now, question from Matt. He's asking about regarding the left-hand image on your sonar screenshot. What's the green cloud shading hanging around mid-water? Let me actually bring up a screenshot, Lee. Let's do that. I'm not sure if this is the screenshot that Matt's referring to.
So the green,
anyway.
You've got bait up there in the top left-hand corner. And obviously the dense part of the bait, very, very high up there near where that 6 is. Yep. And then off the edge of it's just the smaller sort of probably fragments of bait cracking off. But what this shot's showing you too, you've got something on the bottom there, Greg, some sort of structure. It's probably a fridge or something. I don't know. They tend to find their way in Port Phillip Bay a lot. And you've got a whole bunch of small snappers sitting on the structure, and you've got 2 big fish sitting off the structure away from the pins.
Yep.
So, but that's definitely bait there up in that top left-hand corner.
Which is often the case, isn't it? The bigger fish often are sitting back off the structure.
100%. Another thing, a big thing there is for people to get that in their head. Yes, you'll catch fish on the structure, but if you've got a patch of reef, it's also worth sounding around the reef and off the reef by anything up to 100 to 200 metres, because quite often those big fish will be sitting there, away from all the smaller fish, that's for sure.
Yeah. Now, Matt, I'm not sure whether we've answered your question. If not, just ask it again or let us know. Give us a bit of clarification about precisely what you're talking about. So, question from Pat. What do you think about Simrad versus Lorance? Pat has a HGS 7 and he's always having dramas with it.
Look, Pat, they're both amazing. I've used both. I used Lorance for years and years and years. Then I switched over to Simrad. they both use the same technology. They're both owned by Navico. So, they're both using the same NMEAs, the same linking systems, the same cabling, the same everything. They're both great units. Potentially, if you're having dramas with it, I'd like to maybe know what the dramas are. If it's interference, it could be to do with the fit up. It could be transducer installation. It could be those sorts of things, more so to do with rather than just the unit.
Yeah, let us know if you like. Give us a bit more information about the problems that you're having, and if we can help you, we will. And if we can't, we will find someone who can help you. So
yeah,
let's go on and have a look at another screenshot.
On that one there, Greg, you can see we've got a similar scenario. We've got a small fish on the bottom, sort of there on that left-hand side of the screen. You've got a big fish there sitting off the bait. Okay, and that red blob is a column of bait. And what excites me about that one, Greg, is how it's just like a marlin scenario. See how flat it is on that left-hand side of the bait? That's that snapper. He's there just, basically pushing the bait. The bait's trying to get away from him. And then off to the right-hand side, you've got two other little blobs of sort of more broken off, scattered bait. But that single fish on his own, that's the sort of fish that's very, very catchable on, especially on things like soft plastics or jigs or things like that, because he's there feeding on bait fish. That's
Right,
for
because when bait are not nervous, they're either scattered around or they're in around a ball. But if they're getting hammered by something, you've got that. They're all trying to get away. So you're trying not to be the fish on the edge of the school. So
you've got happy bait and you've got sad bait, and it's pretty. I suppose if you put it in scenario, it's like a dog trying to bite you. You keep sort of jumping, you're trying to get away from it, and as the dog lunges at you, you're sort of trying to tuck your bum away from him as he's trying to bite you. And the bait fish are doing the same sort of thing. They're trying to get to the middle of the pack.
Now, a question here from Glenn about what's the shallows that you would troll for snapper?
If it's really shallow water, I tend to cast. I'd rather sort of just drift and cast with plastics in, 2 to 4 meters of water. But I'll troll in 5 meters, 4 meters. But I do really like that 5 to 12 meter area because there's a lot of lures that can run those sorts of depths. A 10-foot diver in 5 meters is 5 foot off the bottom. So, a lot of lures get down that 10 to 20 feet. So it makes it ideal for those sorts of scenarios.
How important is stealth in this scenario, Lee? Port Phillip Bay, obviously, Port Phillip Bay gets a lot of boat traffic. How important is stealth? Because I'd have thought in shallow water, a bit of motor noise, even electric motor noise, might have put them down a bit. You might
it's a funny thing, Greg. Like, yes, it puts them off, but we've had some bites in shallow water where you just go, what are these fish doing? It's like they're committing suicide. Like last year, there was a bite up off Black Rock and Ricketts Point, and these fish were there for weeks and weeks in anything from 4 to 12 meters of water. And I'm not lying. There would be 100 boats in a 1 kilometre square area, and there was just fish after fish getting caught. So it was quite bizarre that the fish were just there in those numbers and feeding like that. But normally, yes, certainly when it's calm. If it's calm, being quiet, I do believe does help, and certainly the really big fish as well.
I remember talking to Alan Bevan over in Perth at one stage, and he's a charter guy and catches 10, 15 sometimes kilo snapper there off the southwest of Western Australia, and he was saying that his best strategy on the shallow reefs is to go out and pull up on a bit of reef and lean over the side of the boat and bang the hull a few times, because it sounds like the crayfishermen bring their pots in and throwing the baits over the side, and the sound actually attracts the snapper in. So, whereas I know shallow reefs that I've fished on, you drop a ball sinker in the bottom of a tinny.
That's all over.
Yeah. All right. Hey, Scratchy's on board. G'day, Scratchy. Good to have you here, mate. So Scratchy wants to know what your favourite soft plastic is for snapper, Lee.
2 styles. I do like a sort of a jerk shad sort of style like that. So whether it's got just a pointy tail like this guy here or that standard fork tail, the reason for these, you fish them on a really light jig head, cast it out, and basically that thing just sinking down on its own looks like a dying bait fish, and they just eat them. Probably my second favourite would be a curl-tail grub, a big curl tail, like a big squidgy wriggler or a big gulp grub or something like that. And I do like them out here in Port Phillip Bay in the deeper water especially, and I like to fish them on a bigger jig head. The tail kicks heaps, it puts out lots of vibration, and I've had a lot of days, Greg, where we might have a few bait rods out and you're not catching anything. You start throwing a big grub around, you're doing big hops off the bottom, and that'll get clobbered, or all of a sudden a bait will get eaten. And I reckon in that scenario, it's potentially the fish picking up on the vibration of that big grub tail going through the water, pulls the fish in, and it fires them up a little bit. So, and colour-wise, bright, like that nuclear chicken or your electric chicken, or white's very popular. But they do tend to have that real thing for some bright colours.
Yeah. So Adrian noticed that you're using singles on your X-Wraps, mate. So he's asking what size Rapalas and what depth you run them.
Okay, so that's an X-Wrap 10, and I've got trebles on that one, but I've got some here with singles. I've got some here with, with double, with trebles. I've got singles. I've got the whole sort of mix. I've even got that one there. He's got a treble on the front and a single on the back. There is absolutely nothing wrong to running singles on your snapper trolling lures. And again, I do like that 10-foot or 15-foot sort of diver because it's quite a specific depth. And if I'm running the downrigger, Greg, I know if I'm in 40 feet of water, I can run the downrigger at 25 feet. And with this lure 20 foot out the back, I know my lure's down 35 feet and I'm 5 feet off the bottom. So I'm not good at maths. So if I stick with, really simple numbers like 10-foot divers, I can work it out. But the one thing I have found, snapper, when they eat a hard body, mate, they eat it like a barrel. They destroy them. And while a lot of fish tend to eat the head of a lure, snapper, I find you'll catch them and they eat the back of the lure. It's like they come in from behind and they just crunch down on it that hard to snap the backbone or do major damage to whatever they're eating. They have no problem at all. And the amount you catch that they've got that much of the lure in their gob and that hook is right down in their mouth versus the front set of treble. So a single works fine. I do recommend if you're fishing for big snapper with hard bodies, run decent trebles because they've got such strong jaws. They literally destroy treble. No problem. Yeah.
Very good. All right. Question from Terry here. So 5 to 8 kilo rod, 20-pound braid, 15 to 20-pound leader. Will that do the job?
100%. 100%. And it's going to depend where you're fishing too. So if you're fishing, really heavy bottom and in tide, you're probably going to want a heavier outfit. But Port Phillip Bay, my own Port Phillip Bay rods are quite light. I just run 4,000 size reels like that on a sort of 4 to 6 kilo spin stick. That's what I like to run, and you have heaps of fun. You've got nice open water. The fish aren't really going to bust you off, and it's a really enjoyable way to fish. And when the fish are a bit finicky, just like anything, whether it's bream or whatever, fishing light, you'll get more bites, but you'll get the fish to commit better to taking the bait. So,
they're not a species that can run you to a reef like a kingfish. If they get you into a reef, it's because they've gone a long distance and it's wrapped around. It's an accidental thing, but you can let them run. You can play them out, take your time with them.
And they feel like they're running a long way on that little gig. Like it really feels like they're running a long way, but they're not. Like when you're running multicolored braid, this fish will be screaming, and you're like, oh, and then you go, oh, hang on, that was maybe 10 meters, and then you go, oh, hang on, it's done maybe 15 meters, So, and a classic example, Greg, is this micro jigging sort of gear, which I know people are doing it all around the country, but this has gone away from heavy fishing. These micro jigging rods, this is basically just a very fancy, whiting rod. But I've caught snapper 15 to 16 pound on this thing, no problem at all. And let me tell you, catch a snapper on a little micro jig rod like that, and it will be far more memorable than any that you catch on a 20-pound mono on a standard big heavy snapper rod.
Excellent. Now, Grant's asking, when you're planning a trip, what do you look at? And when you're sounding for snapper, which part of the reef do you focus on?
Okay, so looking, I suppose if I had to break it down, first of all, we've got such good access to information these days with Facebook and tackle stores and all that sort of stuff. So there's no point saying, I'm going to go and fish here for snapper if the snapper aren't there. So get the info to get yourself into the right area. At the moment, say Western Port, the top end of Western Port and around the Coronilla area is really good because it's shallow and it's a bit warmer. So it makes sense to put your effort into that sort of part of the world. Look at your tide changes and take note of the temperature gauge on your sounder. Like, that's a big, big thing, because it can change. It only needs to change half a degree to a degree, and that can be a lot for a fish. So that's a big, big thing that I definitely look at this time of year. And even in Port Phillip Bay, you'll have different parts of the bay that are warmer than others. Like at the moment, it's actually a bit warmer, sort of Frankston to Mornington, than what it is out the front of Carrum. So, you know, it makes sense that the fish up there's fish here and there's fish up there, but the fish up there are feeding a bit better.
So is it about the actual temperature, or is it about the temperature being stable, if you know what I mean? Do the fish like it warm or cold, or do they just like it to be a stable temperature for a period of time?
I think just that rising temperature, it's getting them out of the winter sort of thing. And I suppose it's like us, like to get out and about, and all of a sudden, you know, I think that's just part of it, Greg. I mean, it's all theories and all that sort of crap, but it sounds good.
We've all got them. We've all got them.
Exactly. You should hear my theories on when I didn't catch them.
All right, we don't want to hear those theories.
No.
We want to hear the ones that work. All right, so mate, Richard's asking how you pick up bigger fish in a school of snapper.
Okay, so that's where having your sounder set up correctly really, you know, that really does help. And having your colour set right, you know, it'll define the bigger fish. If you're having trouble if you've got a lot of fish in an area and you're having trouble defining them, that's when maybe running dual frequency. So most transducers now, we've got our chirp, and you can go chirp and 200, or then you'll often find you'll be able to go, oh, that's a bigger fish there. Okay, obviously the size of the mark does help, but also the thickness of the mark helps a lot, I find, with snapper. You know, that actual thicker part of the boomerang will give you a good indication of how solid that fish is.
Got a good amount of red in the middle, that's a pretty good indication.
That's what we're looking for.
All right, so question from Andrew. So I love this question. This is a good one. So, Lee, lots of people believe sound, including the pinging from a transducer, puts snapper off the chew. Do you turn your sounder off when you're fishing in shallow water? And if so, have you noticed a difference in the bite?
There's so many theories in fishing, and I've had those days when you're like, oh yeah, turn the sounder off, do all that sort of stuff. In most cases, Greg, I just leave it running, because I do also know, and I have also had it at times, when we've turned the sounder on and we've started to catch fish. And whether it's the ping hitting a fish under the boat and it makes them move, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know, man. I do tend to just leave it on, because I do also like to see if there's fish moving under us and stuff. And it's amazing how often, especially in a tidal situation, you'll be like, oh, 2 fish just went under the boat, and you stand there watching the rods, and 20 seconds later, 2 rods go. There's nothing better than that. So.
Yeah, that is cool. Now, I mean, I can tell you from from my scientific background that most fish have a very limited audible range. It varies a little bit from species to species. I don't know what it is for snapper, but most of them, the sound of a transducer is actually beyond their audible range. It's a bit like a dog whistle. You know, you can blow it as hard as you like. We can't hear it. The harder you blow it, the more it hurts the dog's ear, but we can't hear it. It's the same sort of thing. But having said that, you know, if it was me, if I was in shallow water, and if the bite was tough, I'd probably turn it off. But
100%.
Just because it's more of a confidence thing for me.
Yes, 100%. And look, let's be honest, those kilowatt transducers, you can hear them ticking away, and they do get, after a while, it's like that thing, once you hear it, you can't unhear it. So it doesn't drive you crazy.
All right. So Nipper Marshall's having serious trouble with his sounders that you're aware of, Lee, and you've been excellent help. Can the module box at the back give terrible readings as my transducers are plugged into it?
That could be the problem, Nipper, and we've got to keep working through this, because he's having a few problems with the sounder, and it's you know, doing funny things, and I want to get him out, and I do believe that we might need to just try and change things around. And that's a really good tip for people too. If you've got the S5100 module and all that sort of stuff, and if you are having problems, just pull your transducer cords out of the module and go straight into the back of your unit. You know, same thing. If you can swap things around, and these things are all plug and play, so you can do that. So that's a really good option to try that.
And as you said, you can't break anything. Give it a try. You've got nothing to lose.
No, and the big one is too, Greg, and I'm guilty of it. Change one thing and try it. Don't change the whole lot, because when it all works, you go, what was it that actually worked?
Which of those things actually made the difference?
Yeah. Try one thing at a time, see what happens, and then try the next step.
Yeah, good tip. Good tip. All right. Question from Perry. So at what point will you swap between frequency and chirp? When would you go from high chirp to 200 kilohertz?
Down here, Greg, in Port Phillip Bay, we get a lot of sea lice. So early, like in the dark and certain parts of the moon and stuff like that, and they drive you crazy. So
I've heard they can carry you away if it's still too long.
Oh, mate, they'd eat you. They can eat a silver whiting in about a minute. But in that scenario, if you've got lots of clutter in the water, whether it's sea lice or if you're in Western Port and there's lots of sediment in the water and weed and stuff like that, that's where the 200 can really help. 50 can be really good. I've actually got a screenshot there showing dual frequencies and how the differences mark up. So 100%, yeah, if you're in those low light situations, or if you're just getting lots of clutter and you can't get through it with the high chirp, because you get to that point too, you can, bring your gain back and do all that, but then you'll get to that point where you bring it back so much you lose.
You're not getting information.
That's exactly right. So then certainly go to your other frequency.
Yep, good advice. All right, one more question, and we might have a screenshot to mix things up a little bit. So, fishing down the anchor, wind against tide, waste of time, or can you work with it? Good question.
Yeah, you can work with it, and a good way to do it is that's when I will often just go down to 2 or 3 rods, rather than trying to fish multiple rods and having tangles and things like that. Fish 2 or 3 rods, and that's where I'll often then just go straight to my paternoster rigs and fish them straight up and down with a decent sized sinker. They're straight up and down under the boat, and it's maybe not how you want to be fishing in Port Phillip Bay, but at least you're fishing. So, and same thing, Western Port, offshore, whatever, at least you're still fishing.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, now guys, we've still got plenty of questions coming through, and we will get through all of them, so keep them coming. But Lee, let's have a look at another screenshot. So tell us about what we're looking at here.
So what we've got here, Greg, we've got some hard bottom, and as you can see, I've got the colour down quite low. We've got the gain on auto +2, and there's a lot going on in the water, but right in the middle of the shot there, off the back of a bit of a ledge, there's one solid snapper. And then as you move to the right-hand side of the screen, you've got a couple of smaller fish there, maybe a little bit of bait in amongst them, but definitely another couple of smaller fish, which could possibly be smaller snapper. But that one big fish there is exactly what you're looking for. And you can even see that little bit of green, and certainly under where that snapper's sitting, there's a little bit of green in the color. And then even off to the left-hand side, that's just a bit of growth on the bottom, and that's that sort of cungy or scallopy sort of stuff I could be talking about. That's in Western Port. That's not in Port Phillip Bay, and that's where having that little bit of color differentiation will really help you to define, hard bottom to hard bottom with growth on it.
Yep.
That's a nice. I think that was a Lakes entrance snapper, that one. So that's a real Gippsland sort of fish. You can tell by that sort of nose on them. They're quite defining in the way they look. It's funny how I think there's 7 different strains of snapper in Australia. So from your Shark Bay ones over in the west through to, the ones that you get all the way up off Moreton Bay and all that part of the world. And it's funny how they change in shape and sort of look from area to area, and that's a real Gippsland sort of looking fish versus those North Coast ones with the massive knobby heads. These ones get the big knobby nose.
And even, I believe, the teeth on the Gippsland strain are sharper and larger as well than the ones in Port Phillip Bay.
Yeah, 100%. It's like those Gippsland ones, they're real predators. And off Gippsland, I use, off Lakes Entrance and places like that, Greg, one of my favourite baits is about an 8-inch long to 10-inch long live slimy mackerel. Yep. And when they eat them, they smash them. They absolutely smash them. So.
All right.
This is off a Lorance. Someone was asking before. This is off a Lorance. This is Port Phillip Bay. You can see by that beautiful flat mud bottom. Just
is that a shopping cart there?
Yeah, it could be, or a fridge or something. Who knows? But you'll see there we've got a bunch of really small pinkies. These are little pinkies. These are probably, 15 to 30 centimetre fish. And this is how you know your sound is working well. Those funny sort of semi-vertical, almost vertical lines. That's a micro jig working up and down through the water column. And that's showing, when I'm marking that detail, Greg, I know I've got my sounder running well.
So the only problem with that shot, mate, is it didn't stop about here somewhere and go up with a fish on it.
I know.
So it's gone all the way through the fish.
Greg, I was doing everything right. The fish weren't.
They don't listen, mate. They don't listen to podcasts. They don't watch YouTube. No. They don't know what we're doing.
They need to get on board with the program.
All right, let's go back to some of these questions, mate. So we'll see what else we've got coming up here. So Neil's asking about TM185M. What's the advantage over the 275HW on bottom fishing?
It's interesting, this question. I got asked this the other day because I know a lot of Queensland guys like that 185M, but I like the 275 high wide or the SS175 high wide. So I think that just gives the boys that good broad range in the M, for a range of depths that they might be fishing. They might be fishing 15 to 20 metres of water for the reef. They might be fishing out to 60 or 80. So, but yeah, that's a popular sounder. I think a lot of it comes down to personal preference, making sure the guy's fitting up your unit, do it right and get your transducer right, and for your scenario. That's for sure. So, like I said, I've got the high wide chirp, but those medium chirps are really, really good as well.
Yep. Cool. All right. Now, regarding marine parks, is there a setting on the Simrad Go 9 that shows where they are using CMAP charts?
I'm actually a bit stuck on that one, 100%. I'm not going to lie.
But you don't know everything, Lee. Just almost everything.
I thought I did, but I didn't. I'm not sure because I know my CMAP on my big one has it, but I'm not sure about the Go 9. But I'm sure you could get your map if you do your software upgrades. If you don't currently have it, you do your software upgrades. 100% you'll be able to get it on there, no problem at all.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so that's probably more if he's actually got if it's a new map or an older map or whatever. Like, it's really important, and I'm the worst person in the world for doing my software upgrades, like absolute worst. But it's amazing that every time you do, you go, oh, look how much better my unit works.
There's a reason they do those software updates.
That's exactly right.
So Stephen's asking what depths you'll be fishing between October and November in Port Phillip Bay and what areas, mate?
Okay, so October, November, certainly as you roll into November, that is like rolling into peak snapper time. So it will vary, but I suppose through October, still that shallow water along the edge of the reefs in 5 to 12 metres is very, very good. And especially if you've got a bit of a blow, or you've had a bit of a blow from the west, southwest, stuff like that, the fish just love it because it pushes them in there, it stirs everything up. But then as the water warms, the fishing through November tends to get very, very good, and you'll get your bulk schools of fish moving out into that, sitting up in that 16 to 20 metres of water on the edge of the channel and out on the mud and doing all that sort of stuff. So early season, I do like shallow personally. I do like October in probably sub 14 metres, and then as it warms up, you'll get good fishing. And through November, Greg, you can have, and into December, you can have unbelievable fishing through the middle of the day and out in 18 and 20 metres, just sitting on the mud early up, and you can just catch snapper all day sometimes.
Don't have to get up in the early hours of the morning and be at the ramp at 2 o'clock.
No, and so I've had plenty of days when you get out there at 5 and you don't get a fish till 10, and then you smack it between 10 till 2. So
that's just rubber the salt in there.
Yeah.
All right. So Rick's got a question about the best scroll speed for down to 30 metres and ping speeds.
Okay, so down to 30 metres, definitely I still just run. I just run normal ping speed, normal scroll speed, and my ping speed is 18, 17. Yep, I don't run one at maximum, but sort of 17 or 18, and it's like the deeper you go, then I'll slow the ping speed down. Okay, so I'm just letting the pulses go down and then return to the unit, and that tends to give me a better read. So deeper the water, the slower the ping speed. I just tend to keep my scroll speed at ×2 or normal. That works well for me.
Yep. Good. I think we've already had that question. Shane's got a question about how far back to troll your X-wraps.
X-wraps, 20, any diver. It doesn't have to be an X-wrap, but yeah, I just, like my X-wraps and stuff. They love barrel lures too. Like a classic 15 is a really good good snapper lure. So 20 to 30 meters, and I just cruise around at like a walking pace, I suppose. Just in gear. It's just in gear, just ticking along. I'm not moving fast, that's for sure. It's just a really nice slow
3 or 4 k's.
Yeah. And it's amazing, Greg. I've had a lot of snapper over the years where if I'm running, say, 2 downriggers, or you're running probably more so 2 downriggers, you'll get one fish on the downrigger, you pull the boat up, and the boat's hardly moving, and you're fighting the other snapper. And a minute later, the other lure gets eaten. It's like that lure's just probably wriggling along down with a bit of breeze or tide. And so they don't mind a lure going slow. I haven't done well on them with a lure going fast.
Yep. Pick up a few cooter doing that instead.
Yeah.
How about trolling soft plastics, mate?
Yeah, 100%. Done it before, trolled plastics off the back of divers and stuff and off droppers, and it certainly works. Yeah, it certainly works, that's for sure.
Yep. All right, now, this entire question won't come up on the screen, but I will read it to you. I can't read it to you because it's gone off my screen. But
each unit in the front. Yeah. What's the best? Sorry, mate. In your opinion, what is the best?
He's installing a 16-inch unit at the console, 12-inch on the front casting deck with a new 6-meter plate boat. Nice job. In your opinion, and I'll have to take this off the screen for me to be able to read it. In your opinion, what's the best electric trolling motor to go, and what will sync up with the Simrad units?
That's right. Look,
how do you achieve the best readings from your transducer at greater speed? So 2 unrelated questions.
Yep. Yeah, well, I run the motor guide because the motor guide is all integrated with the Simrad Lorance gear with Navico. Mercury actually bought Navico a few months ago. So, so it all interlinks beautifully. You can actually steer and run and use every feature on your motor guide electric off your Simrad or your Lorance unit. So it's such a good thing being able to sit there at the console and you literally just driving your electric off your sounder. So 100% that's what I'd be going with.
I think that answers that question. The second question was how do you achieve the best readings on your sounder when you're traveling at higher speeds?
That's all to do with transducer setup. Well, I don't know about you, Greg, but I believe that's 70 to 80% of a good read is transducer setup. And unfortunately, the best way to get a good read at speed is going to be a through-hole transducer because it's not getting any air, it's smooth, it's just getting clean water flow over it. But if you've got a mount transducer, it can be a case of playing around with it and adjusting it up or down, and you're talking 2, 3, 4 mil, moving it down can change a sounder that's fuzzing out at 15 knots to a sounder that reads beautifully at 25. That, and then obviously adjusting your settings. So if you're running a gain of, auto +5, sounding around at 4 knots, when you get up on the plane, she's going to, fuzz out pretty quick. You're going to need to adjust it again and pull that gain down to get a good read. So I think, I don't know about you, Greg, but I just find a lot of guys, they want to get out there, turn their sounder on, set it, and that's it.
Oh, that's me.
Is it? Come on, mate.
I love auto.
But you got to adjust it because what you're reading and what settings you have in 8 meters of water is completely different to when you drop out into 20, where there might be a bit of tide or the water's warmer, or So it's just a case of always playing around to get that good reading.
Yep. Like we said at the start, you can't break it. Just keep trying things, and you can hit the reset and set it back to what it was at the start. So,
if I haven't broken it, no one can.
Let's have another screenshot, mate. So this one excites me. Look at that.
There you go. So that's 200 kilohertz. That's not high chirp. That's actually an older screenshot, that one, but that's 200 kilohertz, and there's a lot going on here. And you'll see how well the 200 is actually defining everything that's going on there. You've got bait down on the bottom, you've got sort of scattered bait, you've got little clumps, but you've also got two very, very solid snappers sitting pretty well in the middle of the screen. Okay, and then off to the right-hand side of those snapper, there's a little ball of bait. So they've probably cracked that bit of bait off that big patch of bait there. So that big patch of bait on the left, they've cracked that little patch to the right off. And then there's a couple of other smaller fish sitting on the right-hand side of that.
Yeah, these here.
But then if you look closely at that picture, there's other fish all through that picture as well, in amongst that bait. If you look closely, there's arches and stuff going on everywhere. And even, Greg, that patch of bait just below the 4 at the top of the screen,
up here,
even though it's not marking a big fish on it, the fact that that's really dense red indicates to me that there's probably a big fish or a couple of fish sitting nearby.
Yep.
You know, and I think that's part of it. You don't always have to mark the fish to know that he's there.
What's going on over here, mate? Is that bait, or is that a piece of
that pillar of fish at the top?
It's a pillar of fish, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's probably maybe a fish or two at the bottom, and then the rest of it's probably bigger bait, you know, like yakkers or something like that. Whereas down this stuff all down the bottom, that's all like little white baity sort of pilchardy sort of stuff.
Yep.
But I think that taller bait at the top there, it could even be slimies. You know, slimies I find tend to mark up in a vertical column more so, whereas yakkers like to mark up in a ball and pillies like to mark up in a ball. So, but yeah, they could be slimy mackerel.
Excellent. All right, I'll bring up another question. We'll keep knocking the questions off. So for a 3-in-1 transducer, what speed would you expect to read bottom? What speed would you expect to get a good picture in calm to average conditions?
Okay, so 3-in-1 transducer just on down scan, you know, or normal. You would expect to get a decent read at, you know, like to mark fish and stuff at 10, 12, 14 knots, no problem. Your side scan, you need to go slow because it's picking up, the side scan's picking up minor detail. It's picking up shadows and it's working on all that sort of stuff more so than solid. So you need to go slow. And I think even with your standard, just that down scan, it definitely works better slow. If you're going to flip over to your normal transducer, then you're going to get more speed out of it, that's for sure.
Yep. Okay. We got any screenshots of salmon in the bay, mate?
I don't think I've got any that I've sent through to you, mate. No.
What do they look like?
They look even a bit like that last photo, that sort of column of bait we were talking about that could have been slimies. That sort of look there, that's very salmony sort of look, but often a bit more spread out. But that's sort of those sorts of arches that look like that. Definitely a thinner arch that's not got as much boomerang shape to it, if that makes sense.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. Question from Glenn. When you're trialing X-Wraps, what sorts of speeds do you find most successful? I think we've already talked about that. So really slow. Yep. And if you're fishing a totally new area, for example, Tasmania, do you search for fish before you deploy your lures? Or are you happy just to find good amounts of bait and get started?
Well, I think that's what I like about trolling, Greg. I use trolling to basically make me slow down and take in what's going on. And I sort of figure that while I'm sounding around, I may as well have some lures in the water.
Yeah,
it's hard to catch fish when you've got nothing in the water, and that's sort of how I started trolling, because I grew up in the Snowy Mountains and I love trolling for trout. Yes, I know it's slow and it's quiet and it's cold, but I absolutely love it. But that's just what you did. You chucked your lures out and you poked your way along and you worked here and there and you sussed stuff out. And so when I moved to Victoria, I didn't know as such what to do. So I just started, you know, trolling along Ricketts Point and Black Rock and Morty Alec and looking at my sounder. And along the way started catching snapper. And so certainly if you're poking around looking at a new area, you may as well have some lures in the water. And if you're marking bait and you're marking a couple of fish, stick at it. That's for sure.
Yep, cool. So another question from Andrew. How do you identify fish on anchor as compared to when the boat's moving?
Okay, so when you're moving, you'll often get the fish being that probably more stretched out, just a little bit more stretched out in a boomerang. Whereas if they come under the boat nice and slow, then you'll get that really high, perfect sort of arch. So that's all part of it. But same thing, if a fish floats under the boat in the tide, you'll get a great reading out of him and all that. It's probably a lot more to do too, I think, Greg, if the fish itself is actively moving. And I've got some shots there. I don't know if you can find it, Greg, but there's a shot there where there's a bunch of snapper all sort of zigzagging, and then there's one or two big fish off to the side. And
Let me bring up some shots randomly, mate, and you tell me if they're the ones.
Yeah, so see how those marks, they're all sort of real squiggly. They're
These
fish that are moving around.
Yep.
More so than fish that are static sitting there. They're sort of, you can see there's lines sort of going up and coming down. They're fish that are zipping around and being a bit active versus fish that are just sitting there. So that's where you get that perfect sort of mark. I've trolled over those fish with a downrigger. That's the downrigger above the top fish there.
This one here?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
It
depends a little bit. I mean, if there's a bit of current flowing as well, it can look the same as if the boat's moving, can't it? Because
exactly.
The boat's the same thing. So fish are whizzing past.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like a lot of the bass guys will talk about it with the impoundments and stuff. You'll find a school of bass and you get these perfect arches. They're not doing anything, and then you'll get all these like almost horizontal lines all over the screen. They're bass that are moving around, that are feeding, and that are active, and they're the ones you're going to catch.
Yep. Okay. Let's go through another question here. Ferrite clips, mate. Do ferrite clips reduce clutter?
A what?
I haven't heard of this either. So,
no.
Victor, you've got our attention.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit more information. We'd love to know. Do ferrite clips reduce clutter? Anyone who knows anything about ferrite clips, feel free to put something in the chat there. We'll be interested to hear. So,
yeah.
Question from Pat. What depth do you find downscan to be effective with a HTS 7 3-in-1?
Look, it works in deeper water, but I would say down to 20 metres. But it's really good. In that shallow stuff, it picks up the detail, and that's where it's really exceptional. Deeper water, I still prefer just my standard transducer. Or standard sort of, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, what do we got? 2 Evo 3s with a TM185M active image in 30 metres. Fishing in 30 metres, I would say play around with it. I wouldn't. It's not a hard and fast rule, that's for sure. Yeah, it's on the cusp, but I'd also say if it's nice and calm and you're going really slow, if you're drifting, like if you're fishing your plastics and you're just drifting like they often do, you do up on the New South Wales coast where you cast your plastics out, you drift along, letting them sit down. It could be very good in that scenario. It could be very good. If you're sounding along, going quicker, you might find that just the 185Ms are going to be a better option.
Yep. Cool. All right, great question, Shad. What's the correct way to adjust colour and what does it tell us?
Okay, so adjusting your colour is what gives you your detail. So your gain is what gives you a stronger picture as such. Your colour gives you your detail, and the better you can learn to read the colour, the better you'll learn how to work your sounder. So if you have your colour too high, everything will be red. The bottom will be red, fish will be red, bait will be red, everything will look solid. Okay, everything will look like it's made out of solid timber, pretty well, or rock. If you pull that colour back, and again, you don't want to go too far back because then you'll actually lose your arches, but if you pull the colour back, you'll get the definition, and that's what it's all about. So you'll be able to tell the difference between hard bottom and softer bottom, where there's weed, where there's no weed, the return of a fish, like you get that nice solid mark out of a snapper. You will be able to differentiate on bait, tight bait and scattered bait. Like you can have 4 patches of bait on your screen at once, but if your colour's right, you'll go, that one's green and that one's a bit green and red and that one's green, but that one's red. That one that's red is the one we need to be focusing on. So it's really important to get the colour right, that's for sure.
Yep. Just a comment here from Godfrey that leads me to believe that he's probably not a good guy to go out in a boat with if you value your fishing tackle, your car, your boat, or your money to be able to be fine. So thank you for that feedback, Godfrey.
Yeah, thanks, Godfrey. Thanks, Godfrey.
Chasing early season snapper, how long would you give a particular spot after you've sounded some good marks? So I'm assuming that Jacob's asking, you're seeing fish on the sounder, you're not getting a result. Yeah, how long are you going to stick around and keep throwing lures at those fish?
That's a tough one. If you're fishing in if you're fishing in a prime time, I don't like to move. You know, if it's dawn, dusk, tide change, things like that. Because in the start of the season or the cooler parts of the season or low barometer and stuff like that, the fish will just feed in smaller windows. And you might catch 3 snapper, but you might catch them in 20 minutes on the last of the tide. So I don't often find so much that the fish here aren't feeding, but the fish 500 metres away are. So if I'm on fish, I don't like to move. If I'm unsure and I'm getting a bit antsy and I've got to make a move, the first thing I do, Greg, is I'll usually get up, I'll pull my gear in and I'll sound back over where I was fishing, where my baits and everything were sitting. And if there's fish still there, I'm generally very tempted to just re-anchor and keep fishing that area.
Keep working it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So interesting question here from Adrian. So what about maybe throwing some random lures at them? Have you ever thrown a cod lure at a snapper?
Mate, stump jumpers have caught plenty of snapper.
Is that right?
The Halco Poltergeist, I said before, classics. They don't mind weird stuff like that. The Warlock, I think the Warlock, the classic Warlock got quite a good name for trolling snapper, and I think John Hankey even caught some good ones up in Queensland doing it. So they don't mind that, and I think a big part of it is that a cod style or that short body lure with a big bib, it gets down deep. B, it's got a big wobble and it's made to go slow. So it hits all the key points that you need to get a snapper on a lure. That's for sure.
All right, I'm going to throw up another screenshot. We've still got plenty of questions to go through, but let's break it up with a screenshot, mate.
Look at that one. So that one, Greg, that's a classic example, I suppose, of having your colour adjusted properly as well. So
there's lots of clutter here, Lee. Wouldn't you turn the gain down a bit so you can get rid of all that clutter?
The clutter, I like a bit of clutter. Clutter gives you detail. So I've got the colour there at 71. Okay, and if I'd have had that colour, maybe even 75, 76, that patch of bait there on the left-hand side of the screen that's green with a bit of yellow, that would have just been red. Okay, and so you wouldn't have got the definition of it, whereas there I can clearly see that there's one small patch and then there's another patch. And then as we move across there, you can see, like, this is colder water, it's 14.3 degrees. We've got the gain at auto +6, so the gain's actually quite high on this one, but it's giving me that bit of clutter in the background, okay, which is the blue and the bits of green fleck and all that sort of stuff. But as you can see there, we've got pretty awesome snapper marks, I reckon. You've got 3 small fish sitting on the bottom, and you've got 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, possibly 4 fish there, but I would say certainly 3 bigger fish with 1 really, really big snapper sitting just off the bottom. So that's a good example again of having it set correctly. I think if we'd have had the gain down lower, you probably would have missed the detail of the fact that you would have marked the big fish. You probably would have only marked 1 of the 3 fish on the bottom, and you might have only really sort of seen 1 fish above that big fish instead of getting that detail of multiple fish being there.
Yep.
There we go. So what do we got here? We've got high chirp and we've got 50 kilohertz. Okay, we've got 21 metres of water. This is tidal. This is Western Port. You can see all the clutter coming through on the high chirp. And you can see that we've marked a snapper. I've got the colour quite high on this one. And you can see that's why it's really red. But you can see that mark of the snapper on the high chirp. It's quite small. Okay, and it's not zoomed in, but you can see that it's quite small and it's a bit of a mark. if we go across to the 50 kilohertz, look at that. We've got it zoomed in on ×2. So it's one click, right? There's actually 2 snapper there. And you can see that one of them has marked up really well. That one that's marked up really well is that one that we've just marked over there on the high chirp. So this gives those people that sort of information, I suppose, that they were asking. And even, Greg, look at that lump on the 50 kilohertz, that lump on the right-hand side there, exactly where you got your cursor. There's even a bit of growth and stuff going on the top of that lump. That's exactly what we're looking for.
That's another good example of having your colour right. You know, you can see this is the hard bottom. This is a bit of growth on top. That little green line is indicating there's something growing on that rock.
And I would even say I've got my colour too high there.
Yep.
I reckon the colour's too high there. If I pull that colour back a bit more, you would see even more definition on that lump. That's for sure.
I'll bring up another one. No, I won't. That's the last one, mate. I'll go back to that afterwards. We've got some more questions to go through anyway, so let's do that.
Yep. So,
Lee, can you name a worse species than snook? I've struggled to come up with an answer.
Yeah. Sergeant Baker. The New South Wales boys will be agreeing with me on that one. Oh, the other one is a gurnard, and not the pretty one with the pretty wings, the spiky one down here that we get, if anyone knows them.
The red gurnard.
I got whacked by one of them last summer, and for about 2 months, my index finger was swollen. So, yeah, a gurnard.
Yeah, don't do that.
No.
All right. So, Lee, you're still using storm rods for snapper, and what pound mono in Port Phillip Bay?
Mono, I use just 12-pound mono, 14-pound mono, stuff like that. You could go lighter, but it gets knocked around. That's more what it is. You know, they cross lines, they do all that sort of stuff. I do like 12 to 14-pound mono. I like a 30-pound leader. And the heavy leader, for their teeth, but it's more for being able to get the half hitches undone on the baits as well. I will go heavier leader in places like Western Port, Welsh Pool, all that sort of stuff. If I'm fishing up in Gippsland, fishing floating baits in the ocean, or up in New South Wales fishing floating baits, I do like a light leader, like 15 pounds, stuff like that, because that bait's floating down through the water column in clean water that it's got to look really natural.
Yep.
So, and storm rods, these storm rods, I've got some Shimano rods, some Rapala rods. I mix it up, just keep changing it around, and whatever suits on the day.
Because you can.
Yeah.
So another question from Pat about finding sand patches for whiting. So do you prefer to? I'm assuming means standard 2D or down scan.
Yeah. So I have always just liked standard sonar, but that down scan is really good for marking weed. That's really good for it's good for marking the weed, so it makes it easier to define where the sand is.
Where there's not weed.
Yeah, exactly. So that down scan's really good. Hot tip, and it's how I taught myself to do it, was to learn what I was seeing on my sounder. I would literally drive into areas where I could, you see the bottom, and you go, okay, that's sand and that's weed, and you drive over it, and you go, that's what that looks like on the sounder, and you go, oh, that's a bit of rocky bottom, that's what that looks like on the sounder. And then when you're out in 15, 20 metres, when you see that, you know what you're looking at. So it's a really basic, simple thing, but it does make life a lot easier.
Yeah, and you can do the same thing with fish too. If you're trying to figure out what a snapper looks like on a sounder, or a gummy shark, or whatever it might be, when you catch a fish, have a look at the sounder, see what it's showing. And you learn to distinguish between species a little bit. So all right. So Lee, now we've had that one. Let's move on to the next one. Do you use side scan to search an area to cover more ground, and then once you've found structure, move to down scan and 2D?
It really depends what you're doing, I suppose. I do like side scan, but I like side scan in the right scenario. Shallower water, certainly if you're searching along the edge of a bank, side scan's so good for that sort of stuff. The more I use side scan, the more I do like it. I have to admit that. And then I tend to, I'm still a big fan, and I'm getting more into the down scan, but I do like just my 2D as well. Like I often run my side scan and the 2D. But the side scan is so good. I've marked up whiting in Western Port with it, all sorts of stuff. So.
Yep.
Really, really useful piece of gear, that's for sure.
Cool. Have you tried lures over Clifton Springs, Geelong area?
No, I haven't, but I know a lot of guys do, and I know that there's been a lot of really good success. Because you're talking that Geelong, Clifton Springs area, it's similar sort of scenario to what I'm talking about on this side of the bay with that Ricketts Point to Blackrock, like good sort of reefy shoreline. Same thing up the top end of the bay, up around Williamstown and Altona. There's lots of shallow reefs and stuff like that, so it's ideal for trolling plastic or trolling divers and doing that sort of stuff.
Yep. Cool. Now, I think there's only 1 or 2 questions left, and then I've got a couple of extra slides to show, and we can have a bit more of a chat. Through-hole transducer, what would you recommend for an Evo 3, mate?
SS 175 high wide, definitely.
Say it again?
SS 175 high wide chirp.
There you go.
Yeah. Absolutely love it. Just such a good piece of gear. You know, so versatile from, 5 to 10 metres of water out to the shelf. No problem at all. Does the lot.
Yep. Yes, Perry, I can answer that for you. If you look really, really closely at the manual for your Simrad, you'll find there's a snook filter in there. When you find it, let me know.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Because there's a theme coming through here, mate.
Yeah.
Can you determine the difference between snapper and rasp when sounding on broken bottom? And if so, what's the difference between them?
Okay, so generally a good tip is too that your rasp will be right on the hard reef. They love to be on the hard reef because they live in the weed and the rocks and all that sort of stuff. And yes, the snapper will get on the hard reef, but if you can start to try and sound more till you get off that reef, and if you watch your sounder closely and again you have your settings right, you'll notice when you hit that patch of where the reef sort of ends and starts to flatten out maybe a bit more, find that rubble bottom. And it's a funny thing, you've only got to, even if you're anchored up, and I used to do it years ago living in Sydney, you'd anchor up, and if we were catching wrasse and sweep, you were on the reef. It was pretty simple. You only have to re-anchor another 50 metres further off, where you were, and all of a sudden you wouldn't get a bite, but when you got a bite, it would be a snapper.
Yeah.
So
sometimes it's not just about how they appear on the screen, it's about where they appear in relation to the structure and how they're behaving as well. Where they are in the water column can give you a bit of a clue sometimes as well as to what species it might be. So
yeah, 100%. And your snapper will often be up off the bottom a bit too. Like no problem at all. No problem at all. They love to get up on the surface. You fish up in New South Wales, you're in 30 metres of water and you cast a plastic out with a 1/4 ounce jig and you hardly put the rod in the hole and it takes off.
I've seen them marking up at 10 metres below the surface in 90 metres of water off Barwon Banks on the in southeast Queensland. So yeah, they'll definitely come up. Yep.
Yeah, no problem at all.
All right, so a couple more questions coming through here, mate. Let me just bring one of them up on the screen. Do you use colour arrays functionality?
Yeah, use that a lot. That's a really handy thing. If people don't know what it is, colour erase, you go into your menu, into your settings. I think you go into advanced, and then you go into colour erase, and basically a window comes up on the right-hand side of your screen, and it's all the colours from your yellows and your greens to your blues to your reds, and you can literally be going along, going like even that. There was a shot back there where Greg, we were talking about the clutter on the screen. You could go in and you could turn off the blues. And then all of a sudden you won't have that blue clutter, or you could turn out the greens, or you could, you can pull stuff out that you don't want in your picture. That's for sure. Like you could pretty well drop everything out till you just had red if you wanted to, but then you'll lose a lot of your detail. So it is a very, very handy thing, and it's a really handy thing in places where you are getting a lot of clutter in the water. That's for sure.
Yeah. Really good question here from Mark as well. Does the transducer position for high speed sounding still work for low speed prospecting?
Oh, 100%. 100%. So because a transducer, if that's the hull of your boat, and if your transducer's set maybe a little bit higher so that you can go faster and get a good read, when you slow down, that transducer is still in the same spot on the hull, but the whole lot's going even further down into the water where there's going to be less turbulence, less bubbles, and you should by rights get an even better read. That's for sure.
Okay, some questions coming through here now. So, best tip for catching a trophy red, mate? One tip, best tip.
Fish where they are. No. And tell me.
You're putting the pressure on him here, Adrian.
I would say I like a big bait and shallow water, generally speaking. Big bait, shallow water. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you have a preferred moon phase for snapper, mate?
It depends where you're fishing, again, but I think like most species, your building moon's always very, very good. In places like Western Port, the back end of the moon, the few days after, because you get your big tides, and it can make the fishing really good in the shallow areas because it gets really good tide flow happening. So yeah, but look, that building moon is always a great period to go fishing. I think for just so many species.
Yep, cool. So when you're fishing at anchor, mate, what's the best technique to put yourself onto the fish?
Make sure you know where you're going to sit first. If you're really, really concerned that you're in an area where if you stuff it up, you could wreck the fishing, drive 200 meters away, drop the anchor, and make sure you know the direction the boat's going to sit. If you've got tide and all that, it's different. But in Port Phillip Bay, Greg, you can anchor up and think you're going to face that way, and you end up facing that way. So that can be important. And if you're fishing back onto structure, you need to make sure you're getting yourself, or the back of a ledge or something, that you're sitting in the right spot. The other one I do like to do is I will always tend to try and, if I've marked fish here, I like to try and anchor a fair way above them because I can always let out more rope to get back near them, if that makes sense. Whereas a lot of guys will mark the fish there and then they'll drop on the fish. Okay, that's probably the worst thing you can do. I would probably say if I marked a couple of fish sitting in a patch here, I would go a good 50 meters above them if I was in 20 meters of water, at least 50 meters. Drop the anchor and then come back, and then not necessarily have the boat sitting on the fish, have it that I can flip my baits out and it's going to be right near.
Yep, very good. I mean, I'm going to bring up another slide that was on the slide deck that we hadn't talked about.
Yep.
So, snapper on micro jigs, mate. You mentioned it a couple of times. You mentioned you showed us the rod you use. When, where, what water depth? Give us a few tips for targeting snapper with micro jigs.
Jigging snapper is good because you can do it anywhere. And the good thing about jigging snapper, you can do it in tide, you can do it in no tide, shallow water, deep water, all that sort of stuff. And they love them, absolutely love them. And it's becoming more and more popular down here, Greg, in areas of tidal water. You can, and in the channels, because you're not allowed to anchor, but you can drive along, mark the snapper and drop a jig on them, just like you would say for a kingfish. The difference is that the jigs are smaller. This is one of them just here, and this is just a little Koika jig. There's a million different good jigs that you can use, but there's a couple of key features that make these different. We're not using long, skinny, high-speed jigs. This is a jig that you give it a lift and you let it fall, and as it falls, they'll all pretty well have this sort of V-shaped sort of bottom to them, right? So they're not flat. They've got that V-shaped sort of bottom, and as they fall, they'll fall this side down, and they sort of do that down to the bottom. They've got quite a wobble sort of to them as you lift them up. They wriggle and they do all that. But I believe a big part of what makes these work is the hooks that you run on them. And they've just got little tiny hooks, these twin assist hooks or a single assist hook, but they've all got a little bit of flashy stuff on them. We often run them even with a stinger like this. So you've got the assist hooks at the top and then just a single at the bottom end.
Okay.
It's a funny thing, Greg. Have you jigged snapper before?
I haven't.
Okay, it's weird that I've had them, yes, when they smash the jig, but quite often you're just lifting and just dropping, and the bite is like a flathead bite, like goes tap, 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 and you sort of just go lift, and there'll be a bit of weight, and you're like, oh yeah, we're on.
Yep.
And probably one of the biggest mistakes I first made when I started doing it, you're fishing these little jig rods, and we were pulling on them like they were jig rods, give them everything you could, and we kept losing fish. Once we backed off and started to just fight them like a normal fish I might tackle, you're catching this really nice big snapper. You get him up, but they're getting these little tiny hooks, and they're just getting caught, around the face and in the lips and all that sort of stuff. And it's just it's weird how they just come in and just, they will smash them, but they just sort of pick at it. It's not usually this crashing sort of bite like you would expect it to be.
So once again, like Dara, maybe swiping at them rather than swallowing them.
Yeah, it's sort of weird. But once you get him on, just fight it like a normal fish, and you have so much fun jigging them. And it's really good on structure because you can, if you've marked fish sitting on a little pinnacle or something like that, you can drop it straight down and just get it straight down on top of them. You're not 5 meters that way or 5 meters that way. You can get it straight on the top.
Vertical fishing,
Yeah, so it's such a good, fun way to fish, that's for sure.
Got a good question here from Luca, mate. He says, if you mount your transducer facing upwards, can you mark birds in the sky before they start busting?
Wish I could find a transducer
that tells me what the
birds are thinking. I need a transducer that tells me where the birds are going. When they're hiking off into the distance, and you're like, where are they going? You can't keep up with them.
I think the answer to that one, Lee, is you can, but you've actually got to turn your screen upside down as well, and then you've got to stand on your head to read it. So, Luca, if you can give that a try for us just to confirm that it works, and post a photo on the Lorance, Simrad Facebook page, that would be fantastic.
Thanks, Luke. Thank you for that. Hey, check this one out, Greg, too. This is from HP Tackle in WA, and these guys do more jigging, micro jigging, and sort of small jigging stuff than anybody because they've got such a good range of bottom species over there. And snapper love a skirt, let me tell you. And that is I haven't used it, but that is going to be an absolutely dynamite sort of snapper jig. It's got all the right features about it. It's got a heavy head here. This one weighs 110 grams, but they come, you get these in any sizes. But then this skirt and hooks behind it, that as that jig obviously goes up and down, this skirt's just sort of wafting along behind it, and that is the perfect sort of scenario for what is, a good snapper jig. And the best thing about these, you chuck them in the rod holder. You just leave them in the rod holder and let the fish find it and do its thing.
Yeah, very good. All right, so Troy's asking about the best gain and ping settings for deep water for marlin.
Yep. Gain will be day to day. It will be water temperature related. It will be current related. It will be all that sort of stuff. But I straight up, when I fish for marlin and when I do a lot of stuff, but offshore, straight away I go out of all my auto settings. Once I get into that deeper water, there's no auto. I set my range from surface to 200 meters or whatever, 100 fathoms, whatever I need it to be. And my gain goes to manual. And I think you'll generally find your gain will be up in that sort of 85. That's a bit of a good ballpark sort of start. But you get a great read when you get out of that auto setting and you start to go into your manual setting. So I'll even some days run my range, my depth range from the surface just down to 100. I don't always need to be looking at what's going on down the bottom. I'm just looking at what's going on in that 100. Any fish in that area, I can catch it. That's for sure.
That's where you're fishing. You're not fishing down the bottom generally.
No, that's right. And you get such a good read when you, like I said, when you step out of the auto phase and into the manual phase, you'll really get your sounder going well.
Yeah, cool. Now, Luke's got an Evo 3 12-inch and a 16-inch. Can he add a 7-inch down the back? He's also got a 1 kilowatt through-hole transducer.
Yeah, you can, but I don't think the 7's got all the same features as the 12 and 16. So you won't be able to run dual frequency. You won't be able to do all that sort of stuff. So, but yeah, you can still use it as a sounder or GPS and do all that sort of stuff. That's for sure.
Just a bit more limited as well. So, question on the micro jigs, mate. What size would you use in Port Phillip Bay, and what depths do you get the best results?
Micro jigs, Port Phillip Bay. I like a 60-gram sort of size jig. There's no tide, so you don't need a. That's great. That hook's stuck in the jig bag. That's never coming out.
that hook works.
Yeah. So that's a 60-gram jig. It's not overly big. Gets down easy. There's no tide. You can go smaller. You could go bigger. And depth-wise, I suppose you can jig in 8 meters if you want, because you're just sort of working them slow. You're only working the bottom 2 to 3 meters, and then I'll let it back down. But it seems to be really effective in 10 to 20 meters. That's for sure.
Okay, cool. I think we're getting towards the end of our questions here, mate. But we've got one from Michael. Now, guys, we'll stick around a few more minutes. So if you've got any last-minute questions, now's the time, because we've got to wrap it up very shortly. But Michael's question is, do you run noise on for snapper in Port Phillip Bay?
Noise? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either.
I'm not sure.
Might
I'll
need a
say
bit
yes,
more
because I'm usually always talking. There's always plenty of noise.
Might need a bit of clarification, Michael, there. If you just want to fire that question through to us with a bit more detail, we'll see whether we can help you. So, how do you find bird mode on your radar?
You go into your settings, and you got to have the halo to have the bird mode, but it's in the settings there. So it's in same thing with all your range settings and all that sort of stuff. So yeah,
Wouldn't use it a lot for snapper, I wouldn't think.
Not so much for tuna and stuff though.
Yeah, offshore a bit more. Yep.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Look, the questions are starting to run out, so Lee, we might start to wrap it up. I know
easy done.
You've had a long day. It's been a great chat, hour and a half, mate, of absolute gold. Lots of great tips there for everybody who's keen to get out on Port Phillip or Western Port and get a few snapper. Lots of great advice about how to use the sonar, use the Simrad. A couple of other questions coming through, last minute ones. So Sav's asking about, he thinks it might be noise rejection.
Oh, noise rejection. Yeah, I just run it on medium. I generally have my noise rejection on medium.
Yep. There you go. And Steve is asking, do you do private charters and how do we organise? So,
unfortunately, no, I don't. But if people have questions or whatever, you can just message me on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and I'll do my best to help out. I don't always get back to people straight away, but I will get back to you.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I'm going to make this the last question. One coming through from Perry. He's asking about, is proper egging technique required for catching squid?
Look, we all like to have the proper squid rods and do all the fancy jigging and all that sort of stuff, but I think it's absolutely deadly, but a couple of jigs drifting out the back or a squid jig under a float is also so effective too. And I think that's the great thing about squid fishing. You could be using a hand line or you could be using a $2,000 outfit. You can still catch squid, and you can catch them off the rocks or you can catch them in the boat. That's what's so good. We were catching them last weekend. I took my girls out, my two kids out for the day, and it was one of those days, Greg, the squid were really finicky, and we caught more squid on the rods just sitting in the holders drifting than on the ones that were actually working. So it's just a day-to-day thing.
Yep. That's the way it is with squid.
Yep.
All right. I think that's all the questions. So I'm just typing out a reply to Peter Ferguson, who's asking, will this be put up later as a show? Yes, it will, mate. It will be on the Simrad Facebook page. It'll be on my Facebook page, and it'll be on both the Simrad and my YouTube as well. So you can go back and watch it anytime you like. I'll put it on my website as well. For those that want to go over to doclewis.com, you'll find it there. So, perfect. Lee, thanks again, mate. It's been fantastic talking to you. Always a great time when we get together and have a bit of a chat. I always learn a few things, and we have a few laughs along the way. Tonight's been no exception. So thanks so much for your time, mate. Thank you to everybody who's come along and asked some great questions. Made it a great night. Really appreciate your participation. So go safe, everyone. If you're in Melbourne, I'm hoping, fingers crossed for you guys, that the lockdowns end soon, that you'll be out there enjoying that snapper fishing that we've just been talking about, the squid fishing as well. So go safe, and we'll talk to you soon. Another masterclass coming up in about a month on a Monday night. So we'll see you then.